Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Unit 4, Social and Psychology. We're going to get to 4.4, which is Psychodynamic and Humanistic Theories of Personality. And on this, we're going to be looking at, we've already talked a little bit about Freud. We've talked about the psychodynamic theory, and we went over humanistic theory in class, but this will be kind of a reminder and helpful tool for you. All right, everybody. Today we're going to start talking about 4.4, which is going to be the Psychodynamic and Humanistic Theories of Personality. We've covered these in class, but this should help you as we move on. So remember, the psychodynamic theory deals with the unconscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind. And we're going to look at ego defense mechanisms and projective tests as well. So if you think about it, Freud described the mind as a three-level. It's the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious method. And let's define consciousness first before we get into the levels. So consciousness is basically our sense of reality. It's above the waterline on our diagram here. If we go back, this section right here, it's above that waterline. It's the smallest part of what goes on within the mind, according to Freud. Okay, so the psychodynamic theory assumes that unconscious forces determine our behavior and influence personality, and it separates the mind into three levels of consciousness. When we look at the iceberg, the first level of consciousness is our ability, like I said, to make sense of our reality. And basically, it's even though it's the smallest part of our consciousness, it's what we're most aware of. Okay, in our view, the psychodynamic view, the forces that drive personality operate from under the surface, the preconscious level, this level right here. Okay, so and we come down here, and we talked about the id. That's going to be that's going to be our top level here. It's that conscious mind, or I'm sorry. If we look here, the id is going to be that preconscious level. It's going to be that primitive part of our brain. It's going to be that instinct level. It operates on the what's good for me, the pleasure principle at any given moment in time. Okay, so if you think about that, that's the id. The preconscious can bring thoughts, the conscious efforts. Sorry, I have a typo here. We'll correct that later. Okay, and the ego basically resides in both, and it helps out those kind of things. The unconscious is some of that superego, which is our super morality core, the vision of our ideal self. And we need to make sure that we focus and operate on that and understand that. Remember, the superego develops the morality principle, which is an internalized need to comply with the parental and other authority, operating mainly on the unconscious level, but also in the preconscious. So you'll see some versions, like I showed you in class, that has the superego sticking up just a little bit. Okay, superego is that moral sense of right and wrong. It's your conscience. When the id expresses what it wants, the ego tries to address this want, and the superego evaluates the ethical issues of the ego's expression. If the superego judges the expression to be socially appropriate, then the person is gratified. However, if the superego judges the expression to be socially inappropriate, it punishes the person through depression or anxiety. The superego is harsh and judgmental, shaming us to feel guilty. Okay? So just remember, it's a really dark and powerful part of us. So here's a good everyday example. As you know, I always try to get healthier, and I usually fail. We're trying to eat healthier. If you go out with your friends for ice cream, you are more likely, your id may want to indulge in a giant sundae. Your judgmental superego may remind you of your goals and the promise you made to yourself to convince you to have a glass of water. And your ego, the one that's based on reality, may negotiate between the two and decide you can get some low-fat yogurt. So remember, the three parts of the mind are constantly interact with other. The ego is reality-based, referee between the primitive desires of the id and the ideals of the superego. The ego uses strategies to deal and reduce constant threats of anxiety that come from the struggle between the id and the superego. So it's constantly beating each other up and trying to figure it out. So remember the angel and the devil, that concept. Okay. We're going to start talking, though. One of the ego defense mechanisms we're going to talk about is going to be some of our defense mechanisms. And we have several that we're going to talk about here in kind of a rapid fire. Repression. We have no conscious awareness. It's a process of reducing anxiety by blocking impulses or memories from the consciousness. It underlines all other defense mechanisms. So remember, it's a key part. The impulses or memories are threatening or painful. It's going to block them out, okay? Some people experience terrible trauma as children and push these memories out of their mind to live a successful life in the present without being haunted with those experiences. So repression is kind of a key one. Next, we're going to talk about regression. It's when the ego is going to revert to that childlike behavior, and the ego is going to do this to help reduce anxiety by reverting to that earlier stage of development. For example, adults faced with stress of surgery may begin to biting his or her fingernails or sucking their thumb. We're going to realize all the childlike behaviors because our mind and body is trying to protect us. Then we have projection. This is going to be when anxiety-producing feelings are repressed and placed onto another person. For example, suppose a student feels insecure about their own popularity or social standing. Instead of acknowledging these, the student's going to start claiming other students are overly concerned with being liked or fitting in, or projecting their insecurities on others. The student may manage the feelings without directly addressing your own concerns of acceptance and belonging. They can navigate social environment while deflecting attention from their weak spots. We project onto other people. I'm not popular. Those kids are always right and work popular, or I'm not angry, you're angry, those kind of things. So remember that. Displacement occurs when aggressive urges are shifted towards a recipient other than the one who caused the feelings. For example, when you're angry at your parent or other authority figure, but expressing that anger directly to them would cause too much anxiety, you yell at your brother and sister instead. So you're mad at mom and dad, yell at baby brother and sister. It's kind of the trickle-down effect. You displace it because if you yell at mom and dad, more crap's going to happen. This one, you shift it to somebody who can't really fight back. Okay, reaction formation. This one's going to act opposite. Kind of symbolize it, defends against anxiety-producing thoughts or impulses by transforming the unacceptable urge into its opposite. For example, a person who harbors unconscious prejudice towards a group may preach the need for tolerance and inclusivity. They're going to do the exact opposite. They're going to try to rectify that guilt. Of course, rationalization, when excuses are created to identify or justify unacceptable impulses or behavior. For example, a person who wants to exercise regularly skips the gym because they've had a really hard day. I can't go work out. I'm too tired. I've had a hard day. Of course, we have denial, which is the refusal of the ego to accept the reality of the situation. We're not going to deal with it. We're not going to do it because if we do, it's going to produce unbearable anxiety for a parent who hears that their child is causing trouble in school and refuses their little baby angel could never do that. Okay. Sublimation occurs when a person channels unacceptable urges into something of social value, like rage cleaning. Redirect to be positive. Someone with the urge for aggressive behavior may example to turn into a creative expressionism. They may paint. Okay. So those are kind of the big things. So some big theory criticisms of Freud and his theory, case studies, and are one of the basically understand this. Psychodynamic theory is based on case studies that Freud developed from clinical therapy sessions with patients who are primarily upper class, white Austrian women. These case studies lack the methodology we've seen, the scientific method. From there, Freud developed, he based his theoretical explanations that fail to withstand modern scientific scrutiny. There's no empirical data to back it up, okay? And another part of this is that various elements of the mind, the id, the ego, and the super, are impossible to verify with empirical research. There's no operational definition of these concepts and no way to measure them. But Freud, however, suggested they were literal. He created them and used them hypothetically to illustrate how the mind works. He also talks about his beliefs of male superiority, which impacts that. Another criticism is that defense mechanisms prevent awareness of past trauma or current sexual urges, and is contradicted by research on PTSD. Okay. PTA exists not because the trauma is repressed, but because it is constantly being relived. And repressed memory of trauma is the exception rather than the rule. Nonetheless, recent research does suggest that humans sometimes unconsciously attempt to protect their sense of self by distorting reality, forgetting or misinterpreting a trauma, although this appears to be the exception rather than the norm. And the other thing is we need to understand Freud constructs a closed world in which theory can explain away any apparent counterexamples within itself. It's insulated from criticism from both within that world and from without, and the psychoanalytic theory can be attributed to the women's obsession with weaving and knitting unconscious motivation for physical stuff. Basically, he sexualizes women and says that they're not valued. Okay. So if we look at preconscious, we assess personalities. We'll talk about that here in a little bit of detail. Okay. So if you think about this, we're going to talk about the ink blot, the Rorschach, trying to bring those things and thematic applications. These are a little bit older things, okay? So if you think about this, because psychodynamic theories emphasize the role of unconscious forces determining personality behavior, they need tools that can access information that is outside or beyond the person's conscious awareness. In his sessions, Freud used free association and dreams to gain information about the influence. Based on these methods of clinical information gathering, researchers developed projective tests, which are an attempt to reveal the contents of the unconscious by getting people to verbally express unconscious issues in a response to either an arbitrary or ambiguous shape or image. In projective tests, the person's response to the ambiguous image is assumed to be a projection of their unconscious thoughts, feelings, and impulses. Remember, the defense mechanism is projection, in which our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings are placed on somebody else. Two positive tests are the Rorschach ink blot test and the thematic appreciation test. Herman Rorschach created the Rorschach test, and basically it's an ink blot, people trying to ambiguous images to try to get them to their unconscious mind. And if you look at Henry Murray's the TAPT, which is the thematic appreciation theory in the 1930s, an alternative assessment for the Rorschach test. This test kind of involves people taking a standardized set of ambiguous photographs or illustrations, one or two more images of people in situation, and the nature of the setting may not be clear, and the relationship between people is up to the viewer to decide. This test, basically, we're asked to create a story to response to an image that explains who people are, what they're doing, and additionally, what happens later on. The TAP provides more materials to work with than the inkblot test. Both of these tests encourage individuals to say whatever comes to their mind in response to stimulus. This process is thought to tap into the preconscious thoughts that are not immediately conscious, part of the conscious awareness, but can be accessed with some attention, and the unconscious, which houses and represents socially unacceptable desires and emotions. Both the Rorschach and the TAT are criticized for lacking validity, which means researchers, we can't determine it. There's no concrete method to do so, okay? Although trained professionals interpret the test scoring and the test results is still very subjective. Also, because of their subjective nature, the tests are low in reliability, which means the test results are not consistent. When the same person repeats the test, you may see two different things and interpret it differently. Although these projective tests can be used in therapeutic situations to encourage more dialogue with the therapist, they should not be considered methodology for sound tools. So keep that in mind. They're not sound tools. That leads us to basically the humanistic theory, and we talked about this. This is Rogers and Young. I'm sorry, it's going to be Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. We tend to self-actualize. We talked about this in class. Carl Rogers is considered the founder of this approach. And if you really kind of understand that, he believed that people have the innate ability to drive towards self-actualization, which he defined as the ongoing process of getting to our full potential. Okay, and we talked about this a little bit. It brought much a positive need outlook to theories of personality. It brought a new perspective of people as growing as organisms, and that we basically are not just two-dimensional beings. Okay, what we need to understand. It looked rather at the future rather than the past, and the humanistic approach found application beyond psychology and teaching and business. This approach has helped institutionalize management to motivate and form more meaningful relationships with employees. In spite of these, the humanistic theories have significant weakness. The theories are based on hypotheses that were not developed. Therefore, they're extremely difficult to assess using sound scientific methodology. Okay, in addition, critics point out these views are over-optimistic, like we talked about and you've seen in our other workshop. So just kind of remember, humanistic theories focus on the conscious mind and believe that individuals are inherently capable of growth and fulfillment. Okay? So just remember, this one's very positive. Again, we talked about the steps. You have to have these basic needs. See up there if we're talking the Maslow. But Rogers believed that we're constantly building and rebuilding and revising the house. That's it for 4.4. Thanks.